So, Dilip sir, could you start now?
Yes, yes.
Okay, thank you. So, my dear participant, a very good evening and also good morning to Jason. We are really fortunate that we have Jason Anderson today our session, and we are really grateful that Jason able to manage his time and give us some time to conduct a session on action research. What I believe that the participants are teacher educators who are working in PTIs as a teacher trainer. So hopefully, after getting this session, if they experience by themselves, that will be better to supervise our trainee teachers who are in PTIs. So hopefully, we can believe that in the next academic year, hundreds of teachers are getting benefited from this session. So, you know, Jason Anderson is an eco-based teacher educator, author, educational consultant, and he has extensive experience in teacher training, especially in primary level. He has worked in many countries. So hopefully, Jason, the participant who are now, you can really get benefited from this session. So I request Jason Anderson, please, the mic is over to you. Please carry on the session. Jason.
Thank you very much, Siddiq. Thank you also, Dilip. Thank you to my dear colleagues at NAPE, the National Center for Primary Education in Bangladesh. I was there in Mymensingh in 2015, as Dilip said, and I visited some of the PTIs and worked with the many experienced, knowledgeable and effective trainers there as well. So it is my great pleasure to be back there. I'm going to share some slides in a minute, but first I want to check participants. Can you use your chat? Can you hear me okay?
Yes, okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Anyone who can chat, feel free to chat in the chat while I'm talking. I quite like seeing what you're thinking, so feel free to put a question if you don't understand something. If I'm talking too fast, or if you need a term translating, you can say, and then Siddiq or Dilip will translate for you. If we need to use Bangla, it's great for me. It's my favorite language other than English. I learned a little when I was there, but since then I've been in India and I've been speaking lots of Hindi as well. So I'm confusing Hindi and Bangla at the moment. Great. Okay, thank you. Great. I can see some comments in the chat. I've got the chat here. Now, shall I share my screen?
Yes.
I've got some slides. Okay. Can you see my slides?
Yes, we can see.
Yes.
Great, great. So I can see you as well, Dilip and Siddiq. If you can keep your cameras on, then I can see some friendly faces. It makes it much easier. Great, and I can see in the chat that people can see the slides. So I've decided to call the talk, Making Teacher Action Research Learning Centered. When Siddiq asked me to do this talk, I was very happy to hear that NAPE and the PTIs are making use of action research as a means for teachers to develop their practice, both pre-service, before teaching, and in service as experienced professionals. I've been working on action research projects in several countries now, including in India, where I've done some recent research interviewing participants in an action research project there. And with Richard Smith at the University of Warwick, Richard is a writer of a number of books on action research as well. And I'll be drawing on some of that experience here. But it's important to say that I don't have too much experience of the type of action research that you're doing. One question that I always ask myself when I see teachers doing action research is the simple question, what are they learning from the research? Sometimes teachers need to learn a lot of research skills, but for me, the most important type of learning is learning about teaching, learning about their own classroom. And so I decided to call this presentation, Making Teacher Action Research Learning Centered. The learners are the teachers in this example. And you can see a photograph there of, this is AKM Kamaluddin, educational consultant who worked with me in UNICEF on the program Shikbe Protiti Shishu, Every Child Learns. I'm not sure what's happened to that program, if it's still working. But we saw some amazing teachers working in classrooms of all subjects. Today I'm focusing on English, but what I'm saying is hopefully useful for all subjects as well. So there we go. So the aims for this webinar in about the next hour or so, hopefully I've got an hour, let me know, Sadiq, if I haven't. I hope to explore some key differences between what we call teacher research and academic research. I personally think there's an important set of differences. We will ask the question how we can make, or how can we make, PTI action research lead to more learning. I'm sure there is lots of learning happening, but we can always improve the amount of learning that happens in such projects. I want to also look at the question of how simple a good action research report can be. And I've seen several that Sadiq shared with me, and I was impressed actually that they were simple and clear, and they provide good evidence of learning as well. I'm going to share a simple example of an action research cycle with a few suggestions for making the workload lighter for teachers and increasing the learning. We will hopefully have some discussion, maybe using the chat or maybe opinions of my esteemed colleagues at NAPE, of the current DPED, how do we pronounce it, DPED or DPED? The current DPED report format. Also of our role, and I say our because I am also a teacher educator. I'm also a teacher educator, so I see, Deepak, thank you. So I also see myself in the same role as PTI instructors all over Bangladesh. And I'm going to finish by providing you with links to lots of useful resources that I have benefited from, some of which I've helped to develop to help you as PTI trainers and to help the teachers that you are working with. I've called them here teacher learners because they are teachers and they are learners. Okay, how does that sound? So let's begin by looking at some key differences between teacher research and academic research. Well, teacher research usually starts with something that is important to the teacher's own classroom. In other words, a teacher wouldn't necessarily do research on things to do with other teachers in different classrooms, but it usually starts with something in their own classroom. As such, it is relevant and useful to their own teaching and their own context. It may be relevant and useful for teachers working in the same school or in a comparable context. But as we know in Bangladesh, as in many developing countries, there is often a big difference between teachers who work, for example, in rural areas and teachers who work in urban areas. In India, they sometimes use the term first generation schoolgoer. And if their parents haven't been to school, it can be difficult for the parents to support them, especially in rural areas. And as a result, we see sometimes more challenges for the learners. We see lots of success, but often they have to go a little bit further to reach that success. So sometimes a piece of research that is relevant in an urban context is less relevant in rural, and the other way around as well. Teacher research can be shared, but it's only shared if the teacher wants to share it. So one of the most, often the friendliest and most useful formats for sharing teacher research is for teachers to present on the research at conferences. And they can present by creating a poster of the research, or they can present by giving a short talk, sometimes a 15-minute talk about their research. Many teachers go on to publish their research as well, for example, in short publications. But it's important to say that teacher research doesn't have to include a detailed report or any report for it to be useful. It's not so much the writing that is useful, it's the research itself and the learning that happens as a result. Academic research, as I've called it here, well, many of us do academic research for qualifications, such as an MA or master's qualification, a PhD, or for public dissemination. And of course, at NAPE, it is kind of halfway between the two, because there is part of the in-service qualification that I understand involves action research, but there is also part of the pre-service qualification there as well. But at NAPE, I think it's a little bit different to what we might call more formal academic research, which is usually supervised. Notice that use of word, a supervisor, by somebody who is an academic. They have an academic qualification, usually a PhD, and they usually have a position at a university. Academic research may or may not be directly useful for the classroom. Some academics look at things that are quite specific, for which it's difficult to understand what is the relevance for teachers. It often requires time-consuming and complex analysis of data. And for this, we need certain specific research skills. For example, how to put together a questionnaire, how to conduct focus group interviews, how to analyze and code data from interviews or from questionnaires. And it also requires a lot of detailed written reporting. Writing, which often uses a slightly different language. Academic research often doesn't talk about teaching, for example. It talks about instruction, and it uses specific terminology that sometimes is less accessible and less useful for teachers. I prefer to talk about the language, to use the language that we use in the classroom, teaching language, so I will be using that today. Now, I've got a few questions for you, and I'd like you to share your thoughts in the chat box. So if you have a keyboard on your screen, on your computer, or on your phone, if you're watching on a phone, please feel free to put your answers in the chat. So the first question, which of these two types of research, in your opinion, will improve the teaching of Bangladeshi teachers most? And I'll share the second question. Why? And I'm going to wait a few minutes. So thank you, Tashnuva. In-service research. So Tashnuva, do you mean teacher research or academic research?
Actually, I think that for primary school teachings or another activities, teachers' research is very important here.
Thank you, ma'am. What's your name, ma'am?
Because I think that teachers on the way to teaching, every day he finds various kinds of problems. So he has to manage how to manage it. It's the main function of action research. So
yeah,
teachers' research is very useful here.
Thank you. Is it Deepa?
Yes.
Deepa, that is a lot of wisdom. Thank you so much for that. And we're getting lots of opinions in the chat. Teacher research for problem solving, good point. And it's often problem solving, but sometimes it's also exploring to understand more, not just to analyze problems. But problems are often the thing that most of us are most interested in. I know in my classroom, it usually starts with a problem. And some people use the word a puzzle. A problem is something that we know is not good, but a puzzle could be something that we want to understand more as well. So both terms are useful. So the question number 3, which is here for us as PTI instructors, is how can we make the PTI action research relevant and useful to teachers? In other words, learner-centered. And if you want to share in the chat, or if you want to, as Deepa just did, unmute your microphone and share an opinion, I would be very interested to hear. Sharif, you've raised your hand. Please feel free to go ahead, if you can.
Yes, sir. Thank you for giving me a chance to share my views. Actually, I think the teacher research is very important in Bangladeshi context, because academic research is also academic research may bring or create some social impression, but the problem in our school or teacher research is very much problem oriented, problem solving oriented. A teacher can solve a specific problem of a specific class. For this reason, I think and I think it will take a short time to solve any kind of problem. For this reason, I think the teacher research is very convenient and very important to solve the classroom problem or problem of our school. And second one, I think the teacher, if I make our teachers habituated with or oriented with teacher research, then they can apply this experience in their own schools, and they can solve many other problems of their schools. And this way, our DPA teachers can contribute to solve the problem of our schools, and this way we can be benefited.
Yes, very, very wise words. Thank you, Sharif. I'm just looking at the chat as well. Somebody, 33 Hakani Chumila says it helps teachers develop new knowledge directly to their classrooms. And that is something I personally agree with very strongly. The knowledge that we develop is based in our classroom. And lots of you have mentioned about the solving problems, the relevance, improving teachers' potential. But when you're a teacher educator and you're working for a qualification, you face a big challenge, which is we need them to provide some kind of document to document that they have done the research and they have done it properly, effectively. And so, of course, there is the need for an assignment at the DPED teacher research at the PTI academies. So let's have a look. Here are some very simple ideas of mine. These are kind of personal philosophies, and everything I'm going to present now, you must understand, is personal philosophies based on my own experience of working with teachers in their classrooms. Okay, so the first one I would say is where possible, if possible, we should reduce the amount of written work in the action research projects. We should reduce the amount of time on data analysis. I don't know if any of you have ever, for an MA or a PhD, had to code qualitative data, or maybe had to collect and type up statistical data from many questionnaires. But I'm sure you will agree with me, it takes a lot of time and it takes skill as well. I believe we should increase the amount of time exploring and experimenting in classrooms. The word explore is important for me personally because I suppose it leads to improved understanding. Just as Chumila said, to increase our knowledge. Knowledge is good, but understanding is knowledge which is integrated. So improving that integrated knowledge, I think, is really important. And experimenting. Sometimes one experiment can lead to one long action research project. For me personally, I like to do more experiments and to keep the writing of them shorter. Thank you, Dilip, for your comment. And also this one here, increase the amount of time reflecting. What we mean by reflecting is an important question, and there is a lot of discussion of this. I suppose when I say reflecting here, I mean thinking carefully and deeply about what our research has told us. And sometimes personally, I need somebody else to help me to think. We can use the term a mentor. And the PTI instructors can take the role of mentor by encouraging teachers to think about their research and asking difficult questions. Not difficult in the sense of knowledge, but difficult in the sense of questions like why? How do you know that? And getting them to think critically about their research from a kind of a higher order thinking skills perspective. Great. And then number 5, here's the key point, how to provide support for reflection. You as a PTI instructor can work as a mentor, but I bet you have lots and lots of teachers that you have to work with, possibly pre-service and in-service. So one other suggestion is to put them into pairs and to work as buddies so that they can meet together to discuss their research and learn from each other. The other idea, something that is working quite well on many projects in India, I suspect in Bangladesh as well, is to use teacher activity groups, sometimes called tags. And teacher activity groups is where teachers who are maybe doing some research in the same part of Bangladesh can get together once a month and discuss their research, maybe present on their findings, but also present on the challenges they're facing in the research and to get their colleagues to suggest. So there we go. There are some 5 personal suggestions which you should interpret critically, because you as a PTI instructor have many roles to take, and what is useful for me isn't necessarily useful for you in your role in supporting research. That's interesting. Thank you. I'm looking at a comment from Tashnuva Sharmin. As teacher, educator, mentor, we need to make them more comfortable about conducting research. That is so true, I think, to relax them, because to not be afraid of the idea of research. And I'll provide a resource later that also agrees with that key point there. Thank you. So here's an interesting question, and I want your opinion. How much written work is necessary for a teacher to demonstrate that they have conducted useful action research? How many words would you say a teacher should write, or how many pages? What's your opinion? Type your messages in the chat, or if you want to unmute your microphone, you can do. 2 pages. Rajibul, thank you. Yes, somebody's raised their hand. AKM Mujibur Rahman.
Okay, good afternoon. I'm listening your all of things. I think very good ideas. But if you look at our DPED course, the action research is in our DPED course focusing 2 things. One is continuous professional development of the teachers, and as well as the teaching learning approaches in the primary schools. So important area of teaching action research in DPED, so that the teacher can reflect himself or herself and develop his thinking through peer discussion or by mentoring or scaffolding from the PT instructors or head teachers, and also develop himself or herself confidence so that they can continue their debate learning in their school practice, and finally they can help the primary students so that they can successfully achieve the learning outcomes. So writing of research, action research, is just when they submit their assignment as assignment in the DPED. After the DPED, I think it is less important to write the action research paper rather than comprehending the action research for professional development.
Exactly.
So my feelings is it is helpful for the teacher to understand how can I improve myself in the tomorrow, and in this way they will develop themselves continuously, as well as the problem they face in the practical areas they can solve themselves. They need not to go other extra support. It will develop their professional skills, and professionally they will be a confident and effective teacher. That is my feelings. So our goal is how can we help teachers to find out the problems, as well as how can they will find out their solution themselves among their peer group discussion or fortnightly meeting of the professional development meeting. Helping these things, then it will be better for them.
Yes, yes,
so
exactly.
This is my feelings. Thank you very much for giving me
and a really good idea, their fortnightly meetings. Thank you so much. I agree with everything you said there. Thank you. And we're getting some really interesting comments. A wise comment, definitely, from Mohamedullah. It depends on the problem, of course. Narayan Chandra Jay, we only get a month or less to complete action research, then how is it possible effectively? It's a really good question. Many action research projects for teachers typically take a year, and that's why I think it's important to reduce that workload. Well, if we kind of look at the average of what you've said in the chat, I'm just looking here. Many of you have put about 2 to 3 pages, 800, 1,000 words. That's really, really interesting. I kind of thought, well, I thought maybe about 2,000 words might be necessary. And I'll show you an example of one. Siddiq sent me some really nice examples of deep ed action research that is about 2,000 words long as well. But I want to also show you from this document. It's from Bangladesh. Teachers' Voices Capturing the Dynamics of Change, and I will show you the link later. I'm not sure if you can click on the link in my slide, but I'll show you the link later. And here is one example from that. I know it's too small for you to read, don't worry. I'm just going to show you kind of, because it gives you a nice feeling for the overall shape of the piece. But here you can see she's done it quite informally, and it's really communicative and useful for colleagues. She's talked a little bit about the background of the study, shared her research questions here, a description of the study, including the action research cycle she used, some of her findings. You can see these pie charts and tables. And then importantly at the end here, my learning from the study and conclusion. These are headings which personally I feel are very teacher friendly. The teacher is less intimidated by some of the terminology which is used in academic research, such as data analysis, coding, rationale, which just means why. And I'll come back to this and to how we can make the terminology more friendly. Obviously, it may be required within the DPED qualification system to use certain terminology, but we can also explain that terminology to teachers by using simple headings and to provide examples. And this document, Teachers' Voices Capturing the Dynamics of Change, which came from the English in Action project, provides lots of examples of really interesting action research projects from Bangladesh. So let me show you an example now. I'm going to mention an action research cycle which has been developed mainly by Richard Smith, one of my colleagues at Warwick University in the UK. And he calls it Exploratory Action Research, Exploratory Action Research. And in it, he kind of suggests that before we begin with action, we can start with exploration. Let me give you an example as to why that's important. Let's imagine a teacher, let's call her Rumana. And she reads an article, maybe on a website or in a magazine, that recommends that English teachers should not only correct their students' spoken mistakes, or sorry, written mistakes, I'm thinking about writing here, but also they should write positive comments. And she thinks, oh, that's a good idea. So she decides to try that out in an action research project. Now, if we take a typical Kurt Lewin action research, it typically has 4 phases. So she might want to plan to do the action research, then she acts, then she observes, she collects data in some way, and she reflects. And there we go. That's a typical kind of cyclical Kurt Lewin action research cycle that we've used in teaching for a long time. And it's possible she can try out this new idea of adding positive comments. But what about if, before she tries out the action, she explores a little bit more about her context? And one very simple way of exploring is to begin by asking the students' opinions. And I've noticed several examples of questionnaires asked to students in some of the DPED action research projects. But remember that this is a personal feeling. I often learn a lot more by asking the children open questions and getting their open opinions rather than questionnaires. It may be difficult sometimes to analyze that data, but personally, I find it really useful. So let's imagine she explores by asking the students. And here's a group of Bangladeshi students I visited and interviewed actually myself in 2015. And she asks them, you know, do you find correction of mistakes useful? Would you find positive comments? And then the students tell her, well, yes, we like both positive comments and correction, but we also need your suggestions for how to improve our writing. And so then she thinks about that. She analyzes and reflects on what the students have told her. And she thinks, okay, so maybe when I come to acting, I will plan to provide correction, positive comments, and suggestions. So maybe she implements it and she tries it out. And we get to the key kind of question of when is Rumina, sorry, was it Rumina or Rumana? Rumana, sorry, I've made a spelling mistake. When is she learning about teaching within this exploratory action research cycle? At which stages do you think Rumana is learning most? Type your comments, or if you want, you can unmute your microphone. Tashnuva says, analyze the interviews. Mohammed says, reflection. Rafez Alam, reflect. Interviewing. Hakani? It's an interesting question, isn't it? It's not an easy question to answer. Learning can happen at all stages. But it's often that we think about the reflection as, and I kind of agree personally, I believe in reflection quite a lot, that can help. And Abdullah, well, classroom teaching, there is no right answer to this question. It's one of those higher order thinking questions where I'm interested in your opinion. And experience from Mobeen as well, thank you. So this is my opinion. I think during all of these stages, learning can happen in. During the analyze stage, a teacher often has to, for example, they might have to transcribe the interviews by typing them up, which can take a long time. They may have to code the data, which means kind of selecting bits of data and deciding what that data means so that they can then present it objectively in their report. And then, Rumana could summarize and discuss the findings in, for example, her report. Well, for me personally, I think there is more useful learning in the third of those stages. Transcribing information, whilst it is very important in academic research, is, in my opinion, less useful in teacher research because it takes so much time and the teachers and you don't have so much time. So I would personally say summarizing and discussing the findings. A simple way for teachers, if they're working with interviews, if they've recorded them on their mobile phone, for example, they can listen to the recording again and make their own personal notes in a diary about what they've learned. And that, in my opinion, takes much less time, but also leads to as much learning as if they are spending hours and hours transcribing the data. Plus also, if you tell a teacher to transcribe an interview or to code data, they start to feel quite nervous because they may not understand what that means. Whereas if you tell a teacher to make notes on what she learned from the interview with the students or to summarize those findings, they can find that something much easier to do. Now, of course, the planning, the trying out, the interviewing, all of these can lead to further learning. But the reflection is the second stage, typically when we might have more kind of analysis. And reflection, here is one suggestion: discussion with a mentor can help with reflecting. They can compare their findings with colleagues. Sometimes you can even get two teachers working in a similar context to conduct a similar piece of research, and they can see if they've got the same findings from their classroom. And of course, for DPED, it's important that they write up a report to provide evidence of their learning. But again here, I would say that there is more useful learning in the first two of these and less useful learning in the typing up of the report. I've worked with teachers who are really good at things like interviewing their students, at understanding what the students have told them, but they may not be very good at academic writing, especially if they have to do it in a foreign language like English. And I know if I had to do writing about an academic report, even in languages I speak fluently, my Russian is quite good, my Italian is quite good, I would find it really challenging. So one of the things that I would suggest, and again, of course, I'm sure they have to write reports, is you as a DPED instructor can find out a lot more about what the teacher has learned by organizing a meeting with her or him and discussing it together and asking some of these interesting questions. And I'll come back to the kind of questions you can ask them to assess their learning. But again, the buddy idea also comes in useful here. And then again, another interesting suggestion there from Tashnuva Sharmin. One can be an observer and the other can conduct and try out. That's a brilliant idea. So two colleagues working maybe in the same school or nearby schools. One teacher wants to find out about a new approach and she can invite her colleague to come and observe her lesson and to provide feedback. And that creates a kind of a research partnership that they can write separate reports and then they can reverse the process and they can research different things, but to support each other in that situation. Really interesting, thank you. So that's my opinion there you've got there. You may disagree and it's completely acceptable to disagree. I know some researchers would disagree, but I'm always focused on the teacher learning side of it rather than the academic research. So let's have a look at, this is the format for the DPED report. Feel free, Siddiq, if I've misunderstood this, but it looks like this is the format that the teachers are expected to use. And I want to say, first of all, it's very clear guidance here. And if I was a teacher, I would know exactly what to write in each stage. But there's a lot of work here because the teacher is expected to present a lot of data. And also notice that there is a lot of terminology, words like rationale, data analysis, application. All of these are terms which we could, in a way, make simpler for teachers to understand. So here's a question for you. If you are a PTI instructor and a teacher says, what questions do I need to answer in my report? Rather than all of these sections, what questions would you say that the teacher needs to answer in her or his action research report? Convert all of that into a few simple questions. If anybody would like to unmute and share, that would be great.
Can I say something?
Yes, please do, madam.
Okay. It's already written by Murtaj, but I am also try to share the same thing. The first question should be, why am I doing this? Then how it is important for me or for my students, or how it improve my quality or my teaching learning process. And last of all, how can I apply this for all students in all context? Maybe it's not applicable for all context, but usually the usual context, how can I apply this for usual context? So in a simple, I can say these three questions, maybe more.
Thank you. Is it Tashnuva?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, madam. That's really, really interesting. Yeah, it's those key questions. And notice that, as you say, Mohammed Murtaz Hussain asks them as what questions. I know how is different, but we talk about these questions, these open questions, as being important for children learning in the classroom. They're also so important for us. They're the difficult questions and the ones that can lead to the most learning. And everything Tashnuva said there, I agree with. And it's interesting as well, a lot of several of the reports I've seen, teachers focus in on a few students, which is fine. But because most teachers typically have a fairly small number of classrooms, they can also conduct focus group discussions as well with more students. So here are the 5 questions that I thought maybe I would ask the teacher. And if you find them useful, you can ask these questions when you're introducing the action research project to the teacher. The action research report could come later, and you could begin with these 5 questions. The questions that teachers need to answer are, what changes did you decide to make and why? Right, exactly. And we've got other people here as well saying this. Number 2, how did you collect feedback on the impact of the changes? Excuse me, I'm just going to cough. And question number 2 is really about data collection. If we talk about data collection, teachers can sometimes get quite scared. But if you think about it, data collection is essentially feedback. We're learning something about our classrooms, our situation. So how did you collect feedback? The answer could be, I got a colleague to observe my lesson and she gave me feedback from her observation form or from telling me, or I got feedback by asking the students their opinions and they told me, or I got feedback by watching a video of my own lesson and the video told me. So all of these are sources of data, but we can also call them simply feedback when working with teachers. Question number 3, what did the feedback tell you? And of course, you will all know that that is the findings or the results. Both words, findings and results, are used in academic research. Results tends to be used for more quantitative research with numbers and statistics, and findings for more qualitative research, but there is some crossover. And questions number 4 and 5, I suppose, are the important ones. And these are the ones that our colleague was just saying. What did you learn from doing this piece of research? And number 5, how will this affect your future teaching? In some cases, a teacher may find out that what she is doing or what he is doing is effective and this is working. And as a result, the answer to question 5 could be, well, actually, I will continue to do what I'm doing because now I know it's effective. And that is a valid final, if you like, conclusion at the end of the research. But they may also find, okay, so there was a problem. I now know how to improve that situation and how to teach more effectively in the future. So there we go. There's a few questions that can help you to help teachers to unpack, to deconstruct the DPED report to understand it better. But I like the format, it's very clear, and it helps the teacher, I think, to know what to produce in that document as well. Okay, so here's now an interesting question for you to think about as DPED PTI instructors. Here are 3 PTI instructors who are answering the question, how do you see your role when supporting teachers in action research? And I've given them letters. These are imaginary PTI instructors that have come from my imagination. So have a read of them and then put your answer in the chat box. So you could say, I'm 20% A, 30% B, 60% C. Or you could say, I'm 100% C. What's your opinion? I'm really interested to hear. And if anyone wants to unmute as well, you can do so. Thank you, Rajabul Alam. Motivating teachers towards research, helping to find problems and solution, how to disseminate reports. But feel free just to write A, B, or C if you want to in the chat, or just write maybe 50%, 30%. Okay. Samuel has said B. Deepa is A. Okay, here we go. Here's some more complex ones. Oh, it's happening fast now. Tashnuva, 40% A, 60% B. A, B. So lots of you are saying B, which is kind of an interesting one, yeah. Giving clear conception. Nobody's saying C, that's surprising me. C is kind of the assessor role to make sure that the quality of teaching in Bangladeshi classrooms remains high. Johnny Das, 80% A, 80% B, sorry, 20% A. In the context of our country, thank you, Mohammed Abdul Kalam Azad. B, yeah. Yeah, so in a way, B is kind of the answer that hopefully helps us to achieve our goals. Sukhdev, 30% A, 50% B, 20% C. In reality, we have to balance between these roles, don't we? We have to do the knowledge delivery. Yes, and that's interesting. Thank you, Mohammed Betin. 10% A, 70% B, 20% C. If you can do that, that's amazing. If you can focus on the B, because I agree with you, I think, Mohammed, our job is to help the trainee teachers to learn. And even when you're working with in-service teachers, which I know you have to do on the qualifications, many of them may have started in their first year of teaching to do maybe what their colleagues do in their school, which in some schools may be good, in others may not be so good. It may be a bit more, lead to less learning. Whereas what you've trained them in the PTI may be different. And as a result, I think if we can focus on action research that helps them to learn, then it's likely that everybody, especially the children, will benefit from this. If anybody would like to share a thought here by unmuting themselves. Lots of comments. Yeah, but what we've got here is really interesting. There's a clear focus. If we take the average of these, I wonder if we could, that would be a bit of research. We'd probably have a balance with B strongest. And I would agree with that as well. As a teacher educator, I have to assess teachers. I sometimes work on the Cambridge CELTA course. I don't know if you know that one. And you do have to perform the role of assessor, but it's the role I don't like. I do it, but I do it reluctantly, and I like to support teachers and to work with them. And balancing those roles is always a challenge, but that's a topic for a different webinar. Okay, now I'm going to share with you now some useful resources for action research. Just type in the chat box, have you seen this handbook? It's called A Handbook for Exploratory Action Research, and it was written by Richard Smith and Paula Rebolledo for British Council. Excuse me. Yes, Mohammed has seen it. Now, this handbook, I think, is really useful. It provides the model which involves exploration followed by action that I showed you earlier. It includes an earlier stage of planning for exploration as well, but it's basically the model I showed you in that hypothetical example. Tashnu Versina soft copy, yeah. And it provides step-by-step explanation. It's not technical, and it explains a range of basic research techniques with lots and lots of examples. It includes practical activities that you can do with teachers in the training room, and you can also send to teachers. And if you're in Zoom meetings with teachers, you can ask them the questions in the Zoom meetings as well. You can ask them to read a chapter and then to respond to several questions. And if you are having difficulty understanding action research as an instructor, I know when I first came across action research, I found it difficult to understand. Why is this necessary? What do we mean by research? We'll start here, read the handbook, and it will give you a really good introduction to it. It's designed for teachers. The English is simple and non-technical. And oh, that's a nice compliment. I'll pass that on to Richard when I see him. And there is a link at the bottom there, but I'll also provide a link at the end of this webinar so that you can download the handbook if you haven't got it. But it's clear that you guys have got it. By the way, Richard mentioned the fact that he would be very interested to work with the NAPE, his NAPE colleagues on action research projects in Bangladesh. So let me know if you want me to suggest it. Now, here's the other resource which I want to praise all of the Bangladeshi teachers who contributed. It's an amazing thing. It's called Teachers' Voices, and it was part of the English in Action project. And the great thing is it's Bangladeshi, it's Amadardesh, as it says there. It's simple but effective examples of action research projects. There are examples of how to write up a study concisely. Of course, it doesn't follow the DPID format, but you can still see the same basic elements. And there is lots for all of us to learn about. When I read books like this, I learn a huge amount about teachers in their context. You can see there a QR code that you may be able to click on if you want to download it for your phone. Thank you again, Mohammed Abdul Kalam. Now, this is the latest one that Richard has produced, and this one is particularly useful for PTI instructors. It's designed for you, designed for those who are supporting teacher action research. It is simple, clear, practical, and it provides you with when Richard talks about being a mentor, he talks about the supporting role, the role B, helping teachers to conduct research, to understand their classrooms more effectively. And it's also based on his experience. You can see the example photo there is probably, I think it's from an Indian classroom. And Richard has conducted lots of research in India on, for example, the Action Research Mentoring Scheme there. Nazmul, thank you for that charming and wonderful presentation. Thank you. I presume you're talking about Richard's books. And there's a QR code, but I'll provide another at the end as well. Now, here is another resource. This comes from teachers in Chile in South America. And you can see Richard's name there, but Paula Reboyedo was the lead author on this one, along with Deborah Bullock, also produced for the British Council. And it's called Champion Teachers. If you just Google Champion Teachers, you'll find it. The useful thing about this is it's ideas from a different context. These are all real teachers talking about their own action research projects. So it can give you ideas to suggest to Bangladeshi teachers about what they can research. And whilst they will find different things to the Chilean teachers, because every context is different, it provides some fresh ideas that I think you might find useful. So there we go. Now, if you're interested in downloading the slides I've presented, the PowerPoint slides you can get from me just by sending me a message, an email message, or on my website. But I've also put a copy of these slides in PDF format. If you want to go to my website, to the talks page, scroll down until you find it. And here are all of the books and booklets that I have referenced in this talk. Just to mention something, if you are an English teacher educator and you're part of the, I understand it's a new TESOL Society of Bangladesh, then tomorrow Richard is doing a talk, one of the plenaries for the TESOL Society. And if you go to that Facebook page, you'll find the details of the talk. So there we go. Hopefully that's been useful, but now I'd really like to hear your opinions, some comments, some ideas, some critique. If you want to be critical of my talk, I welcome that. And it's very important if you think there is something which I've said which is maybe not a good idea, not useful, and that's really interesting. And I've got some hands raised as well. So yes, please go ahead. AKM Mutabar.
Okay, thank you. Very good discussion and very good sharing on action research. In my feelings, my feelings is like that. If action research is essential for DPED teacher students, then it focuses two things again.
Mr. Mojib, there is some problem with your device so far.
I can hear you.
TV sound.
Hello.
Yes. Okay.
No, there is no TV here.
Some noisy sound is coming.
Noisy sound.
Teachers have two roles in DPED. Yeah.
I can hear. Continue. I can hear.
There is two roles of DPED. Now it is clear. Yeah. The first one is action research help them to develop their professional skills, which I mentioned earlier. And second one is when they are in DPA, they are doing, and during the practice, they did a lot of things, baseline, fortnight assessment, and classroom teaching learning. So if it is I think it is a good idea to relate these things with the action research. Then they will match it in their context and they can continue the action research. This is one point. Another point is when they are going to write the action research, the language is very problem for them. So what types of language they can use to write action research? Very simple language it may be, very simple language, because I think the writing is important, but it is not important than they are developing their experiential learning.
So true. Continue. Oh, he's gone. AKM just mentioned about the experiential learning. I agree with that so strongly. And he's also mentioning some really important points there. The writing. You learn a new language if you have to write about formal research. And therefore, as teachers, we have a choice. We can either teach them that language, and I'm not saying don't do it. That can be really useful. If they're going to do an MA or a PhD, it's essential. And it gives them a skill so that they can communicate with other teachers, with other researchers around the world. I gave some examples earlier. We talk about, for example, data collection, data coding, data analysis, whereas a teacher might talk about feedback or listening or asking questions to the learners. Two very simple suggestions when it comes to the language. The first one is to say to them, it's okay if you want to write in Bangla first. They may have to write it in English afterwards. I don't know. If they don't, then great. Get them to do it in Bangla, because Bangla is a language which we can write about research in. We can share our ideas. Bangladeshis can be sophisticated in their mother tongue in ways that maybe I can't do in foreign languages. And I'd be very surprised if Bangladeshis, if all teachers could do it in English. You guys can, you're instructors, amazing levels of English, but it's very, very difficult to write about research in foreign languages. So my first suggestion is, where possible, get them to write in Bangla. And even if they have to write ultimately in English, the Bangla can be a scaffolding tool. If they write it first in Bangla, then the challenge they face is a slightly different one. They have to now translate that into academic English, or at least into some kind of English. But that will at least give them something to base it on. And they can work with colleagues, even someone who maybe speaks a bit better English. But the key point here is that the reason why we're getting them to do academic research is for the learning. And if their English isn't so good, it doesn't mean they can't learn from it. And so writing in Bangla first is at least a good way to do that. The other suggestion is to provide a glossary of academic terms. So terms which we use when we're talking about research, you can put the academic term, the kind of typical classroom English term, and even the Bangla term. So you can have 3 columns in a table and provide teachers with all of that language. And you can share it as colleagues, maybe as a resource which can be shared on the DPED website. Thank you, Tashnuva. Yes, very good comment. Yes, we've got hand raised from BM Asadu Zaman.
Thank you for prestigious performance. I want to say something about my DPED students. When I provide them as assignment, that time I think that they have sound knowledge about this assignment. But when they go for action research, it would be more difficult than the assignment. At that time, I asked them, what's the problem? They are worried about their terminology. It's not familiar with them, because this is the first time they introduced with the action research. So I want to know if they want to write a action research as an assignment. So what type of problem could be arised? Here, terminology is main problem. If someone want to edit a pie chart or table diagrams, it's very difficult for them. And another thing is that when I ask them to find out a title, that time they are unable to do it. They have no title, they have no problems. So such type of problems are arise from our field. So I expect your conception or assumption about this.
Thank you. When you say title, why is title a problem? Can you explain what's the problem? Because somebody else mentioned in the chat about titles. Why?
Yeah, yes, and, it's a mistake for me. It's a problem.
So is it ideas that they have problems with? Is it difficult for them to come up with ideas for their action research, or is it the language for the title?
It's here language is the most value for written it.
Language.
Language being. But in case of Bengali, they have no problem. But in case of English, they are the problem.
Great. So I think that's a really important point, that the research is leading to learning. And the issue is to do with language or languaging choices. It's a really important point to mention that we need to focus on the learning, and therefore, where possible, doing it in Bangla is great. But if they can't just do it in Bangla, then you can provide support with them to get their ideas from Bangla to English. And one suggestion there is to take some practical examples in the training classroom. When you're working with the teachers yourself, or when you're doing a webinar, provide them some titles in Bangla and ask them to translate them to English in the chat box, and get some suggestions, and then also then show them your suggestions for how to translate them to English, and explain about the terminology and why you would use this in Bangla and this in English and so on. And you can even use simple classroom language first. One of my opinions here, and in the resource that I'm showing you there, the last one from the teachers' voices capturing the dynamics of change, that one presents less academic terminology, and it presents the research in less academic terms, but it's still good English. It's still English that shows that they have learned from the project, and the titles in those projects I think are all appropriate. So I wouldn't worry too much about the titles personally. I would focus on those 5 questions that I presented to you a little bit earlier, where you're asking the teacher to ask the questions, what would you like to research and why? That question of why is so important. Why is this an issue for you? Why is this important? How will you collect feedback? How will you collect data, if you want to use that term? And then what does the data tell you, and what do you learn from it? And possibly what changes will you make? To me, if they answer all of those 5 questions in any language, then learning is happening.
Thank you.
We have the hand raised from Nazmul Huda.
Excuse me, I would like to ask something. Our DPED in our PTA, our DPED teachers cannot arrange language. They can understand all things, but they cannot arrange the language. What is the problem? What is your suggestion about this? Please tell us something.
They cannot
so that
arrange
we can
their
overcome
ideas.
This problem.
Yeah. Well, so I suppose we're on to the topic of academic English, aren't we? We're kind of looking at the challenge of teachers writing in academic English. Now, Nazmul Huda, this is clearly a point that many of the teachers are sharing is an issue. But I want to just reaffirm the point that if the learning is happening, it doesn't matter which language they're writing it in. But if your focus is on developing their academic English and their ability to write research papers, the resource I suggested earlier, where you have some kind of translation of everyday English, academic English, Bangla equivalent, that would be useful. But also another suggestion is to give them an example of a good example of one of the PTI research projects. And Siddiq shared several with me, actually. Get them to read through it and to notice the language that's being used. And here's a few suggestions for doing this. Give them example sentences from everyday English, and they have to read through the report and find the sentence in the report that gives the same information, so that they notice the difference between the academic English and the everyday English. Or you can use translation. I'm a great believer in translation for learning. I've used it for learning all of my languages. You can give them a sentence in Bangla and say, find the sentence in the report that gives this information. Notice, what is the verb phrase? How did they use it? And Nazmul, you mentioned about organization. Give the teachers practice in doing this. Imagine that they're your English language students. Give them 5 ideas. Tell them to arrange them in a paragraph, and then tell them to convert them into academic English. And you can get them to do it in groups so that those who have slightly stronger English can help the weaker ones. And then they can compare how they've done it with how it was done in the original report. So the number one thing I would say is use examples of good reports to teach the academic English. Get them constructing their own knowledge, and recognize that this is a type of language learning, that they need to learn specific academic English, and they need to notice the terminology, hence the dictionary. And they also need to understand how to bring that together to create sentences, verb phrases, paragraphs, discourse all together. So use reports as examples for them to deconstruct and to notice the language that's being used there.
Thank you very much.
But it's not an easy problem because we're asking them to write at the highest level. So if I was doing it, I wouldn't expect too much success. I would just expect kind of that they attempt it. And I would always, as a teacher educator, focus on that opinion B. Have they learned from this project? If they have, yes, great, I'm happy, that will pass. If I can see a report where somebody hasn't really learned from the project, where they haven't really understood what they would do, I would interact with that teacher and push them more for more learning. For me, it's not about the English or the language, it's much more about the learning. But I've said that, I'm sure. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So my dear participants, if you have any more questions, please ask Jason. We're about to finish our session. It's a 1 hour long session. I think Jason have managed a wonderful time for us. So if you have any more queries, please ask query.
Sir, I think the full system doing action research is not clear to me. If allows some more time for us, then it will be helpful for us.
So just say that again. It's not clear to you. The process of action research, do you mean?
Sir,
Yes.
may I ask you a question, sir?
All the process.
Yes, I'd like to have some words with Mr. Jason. Jason, I'd like to say thank you and congratulate you to conduct a very wonderful and very enjoyable session. I think it is a memorable session for us and along as well as our participants. Every one of the course enjoyed your session very much. Do you like to extend some few minutes for our participants if there is no problem with you?
Sure. Of course, no problem, Dilip. I was just going to show to your colleague there, we had that question. I'm just going to see if I can change what I'm sharing on my screen. Apologies if this doesn't work. Let's see if you can see this. Share. Can you see this screen? This is a page from Smith and Reboyedo, Handbook for Exploratory Action Research. Here they explain all the different stages. I'm just going to zoom up. Okay. And there is a nice example of an action research story. And then they explain how the teacher planned to make a change, acted, observed, and then, oh, sorry, it's not easy to read in this one. And then they reflected. It's just a problem with my PDF reader here. And they show the process here. So if you, as a teacher, educator, are not clear about action research, this is the book that I would recommend that you read, and read it carefully. Take your time to read it, and even read with a colleague. And back to my references, it's the second one in these references, Smith and Reboyedo. No, sorry, the third one, Smith and Reboyedo, A Handbook for Exploratory Action Research. Reading through that will help you. And feel free to read it with a colleague. You read a chapter, and then you get together and discuss it.
So thank you, Jason. Thank you, my dear participant. We have a wonderful session. And thank you. Just you were able to give your valuable time for us. And actually, we are benefited a lot. We get to know a lot of things from you, and you have shared a lot of materials. Very resourceful for our PTI instructors. I think if we are benefited, hundreds of teachers are already get benefited from us as we are working as a teacher trainer in PTIs. So thank you, my dear participant. You have given a wonderful time and have shown patience for this session. And again, Jason, hopefully in next another training, we'll invite you again. And I think you will be saying no to us. And actually, I also convey gratitude on behalf of my DZ NAPE. He was really happy when you just agreed to have a session with us. And unfortunately, he doesn't present here today. So I just convey my gratitude on behalf of my visit to you. So thank you, Jason. Have a good afternoon. I think what your time zone here, there is a time zone difference. So thank you all of the participants. We can conclude here. Jason, have you many words to say?
Thank you so much, Siddiq. Thank you, Siddiq, for this opportunity to interact with colleagues in Bangladesh. I found it really useful. Thank you also, Dilip. I found it really useful that you were willing to engage with lots of opinions in the chat and also your opinions, which were very wise. And it's really interesting for me to learn about the challenges that the teachers you work with are facing. And I wonder if you can share with me the video. I will share it with Richard because I want to point him to your comments and suggestions at the end so that he can also think about resources that may be useful for teacher educators like yourself in Bangladesh when working with in the PTI projects. Thank you so much. And I look forward to the time when I can come back to the beautiful country of Bangladesh and work with you guys directly in Mymensingh and in Dhaka. And to visit some schools, some more schools as well, and to work with the wonderful teachers there as well. Okay, guys, thank you very much for having me.
Thank you
a lot, sir.
Same to you. Same to you. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Anderson. Thanks. Thanks a
See you
lot.
again.
Thank you, Jason.
Thank you. Thank you.
See you later.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.